So why did you cancel the show?
I thought it was rubbish. I thought it was pathetic. I mean, I'd seen Star Wars,
yeah,
and I'd seen Close Encounters and E.T., and then I had to watch these cardboard things probably clonking across the floor, trying to scare kids. You know, you just sit and laugh at it.
2004, and aside from the brief blip that was the 1996 TV movie and short-lived repeat seasons, Doctor Who seemed long dead to the general public. Once a fond memory of the golden age of British television, exported to over 65 countries, the only real exposure for this once great fixture of Saturday night entertainment now seemed only to come in the form of comic relief to a sneering public and smugly self-assured industry.
This is Bock, half gargoyle, half leotard. And now this one is called the Candy Man.
Even those of us who knew how great the show could be had come to realise that our long-held dreams of its return were just that, dreams.
I am Formosi, from the planet Fomas. Our enemies are the Argolans, who we once had a 20-minute nuclear war with.
How could the mountain of public incredulity and supercilious dismissal ever be summited without a complete reboot, which would result in our favourite programme becoming fundamentally different in all but name? When Doctor Who magazine announced that the BBC were in fact bringing it back, we were understandably sceptical. After so many rumours had turned out to be baseless, we had long stopped getting excited over the names of actors and directors bandied about with abandon by the tabloids. And even if it was true, it couldn't possibly succeed in the 21st century, be embraced by a nation who no longer sat together to watch TV as a family, enjoyed by an audience who surely would demand the kind of constant computer-generated trickery only $100 million budgets could provide. Well, could it? The road to the programme's triumphant return had its quiet beginning back in 2002, with the realisation by the team behind the Doctor Who page of the BBC's website that the corporation had no intention of marking the 40th anniversary of the legendary series with any original projects. The fact that the sales of VHS and DVDs of classic stories were still strong, the tie-in magazine being consistently published monthly for 13 years since the show had been cancelled, and the Big Finish audio series going from strength to strength didn't seem to encourage the powers that be at the BBC to mark the seminal date, is indicative of how the attitude towards sci-fi and family drama, inculcated by Michael Grade and Jonathan Powell, had seeped into the bones of the corporation. It also reflects a larger cultural attitude summed up by Grade's appearance on tongue-in-cheek chat show Room 101 in April of that year.
Already, but you've only said 2 words, but already people are against whatever you're going to say.
I knew I was in trouble. I saw the hush puppies and the National Health glasses on the way in.
Are you suggesting there's members of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society here?
They're everywhere.
The stereotype of the science fiction fan being a socially awkward anorak-wearing freak made us all feel like social pariahs and encouraged us to be ashamed of our love of Doctor Who, that even though the show still had an enormous fan base, we were weirdos who should not be pandered to despite our contribution to the licence fee. Thankfully, the team at BBCi thought otherwise, and realised that without any intention on the part of the corporation to mark the occasion, it was up to them to do so, or risk the seminal date passing without any fanfare or acknowledgement at all. They had already produced Death Comes to Time, a webcast audio drama featuring Sylvester McCoy the previous year, and had enlisted the help of Big Finish to produce a follow-up webcast, Real Time, and a new adaptation of Douglas Adams's famously abandoned 4th Doctor story, Shada, with Paul McGann's 8th Doctor as the lead. These had all enjoyed limited success in fan circles, and the team planned to use the experience they had gained to produce an entirely new Doctor Who story, not a mere webcast, but a fully animated adventure with a new Doctor, an official continuation of the series.
It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. One of the greatest intellects of your generation.
Their previous efforts had been more focused on the audio aspects rather than the visuals, with illustrations by comic book artist Lee Sullivan, including limited animation. For the new project, the team's ambitions were far greater, and established animation company Cosgrove Hall, most famous for 80s favourites Danger Mouse and Count Duckula, were employed to realise the visuals. Originally planned as 3 stories comprised of 4 episodes each, investment difficulties resulted in the animation being whittled down to a single adventure of 6 installments titled Scream of the Schalke, scripted by New Adventures alumnus Paul Cornell. The production team decided to eschew the services of Big Finish this time around for reasons unclear, and their lack of experience can be heard in the rather sparse soundscapes and somewhat underwhelming performances of the first couple of installments.
No! It's not where we're supposed to be. I'm going to take a look around. I don't want to be here! I won't do it! Whatever it is! From the smell of the air, England, 2003. Ugh. But something's odd about it. And where is everybody? Oh, for goodness sake!
In an effort to save money, the aim was to have live Foley artists during recording to provide the sound effects, but this proved not to be the case on the day, with only a CD of old BBC sound effects on offer, meaning that extensive post-production would be needed to finish the project. Without the BBC having any seemingly definitive plans for the show's future, the animated webcast was treated as an official next step for the programme from the off. Most significant to sealing this status as New Who was the decision to create a new incarnation of the lead character, with Richard E. Grant, who had long been mooted for the role, cast as the 9th Doctor, after the possibility of landing veteran established actor Robbie Williams was abandoned.
Either something very odd is going on down there, or the rats have discovered the delights of the doily cart.
For me, Grant's Doctor is a little underwhelming. It's clear in the early episodes that he seems a little lost about how to play the character.
You're all pussyfooting around, walking on eggshells. If you don't tell me what you're afraid of, I'll keep making noise until I find out for myself.
He comes across as a somewhat spikier incarnation, akin to Colin Baker's 6th or Hartnell's 1st. But as the story continues, he becomes more eccentric and wittier, a development apparently ad-libbed by Grant himself as he became more comfortable in the role.
That's it! Take me home, big boy!
Interviews given at the time show that Grant had never watched Doctor Who, and not seeing the project as important as a film or television production, didn't really go to great lengths to research the character or much prepare for the role. Still, if I was an established actor like Grant and had shown up to a pokey studio where the production team seemed to be running about like headless chickens, with only a crackly CD of old radiophonic sound effects to support my performance, I think I might be less than enthusiastic too.
You remind me of all the others.
Another big name to feature was Sir Derek Jacobi as the Master, intriguingly appearing in the form of a robot restricted to the TARDIS.
I am the Master, and you will...
Evening.
Come to like me when you get to know me, my dear Miss Cheney.
Originally included after it was decreed that something from the past of the programme should be folded in, the Master acting as a sort of companion to the Doctor, where his motivations are suspect, is probably the most interesting thing in the story, and probably the only part I miss not seeing developed further.
What do you think?
Just a touch flat.
Another thing to listen out for is a young actor who got wind of the production whilst recording was underway and persuaded the team to give him a cameo during a break in his performance in Rumpole of the Bailey next door.
We're locked up for the weekend! Go away! There's nothing here!
A lifelong Doctor Who fan, David Tennant was delighted at the opportunity to portray Second Warehouseman. After all, the opportunity to be part of Doctor Who doesn't come up twice in one lifetime. A big factor to remember when looking back at Scream of the Schalke is that Cosgrove were instructed to create an animation that could be played on people's monitors without the need for time-consuming downloads. In 2003, many people did not yet have broadband internet, and so therefore the consumption of video and imagery was a far slower process than the present day, with the average speed being 56 kilobits per second. In order for the new Doctor Who to be enjoyed as quickly as possible by viewers of the BBC website, it was created using Adobe's Flash animation software, which bestowed both benefits and drawbacks. On the one hand, we could watch it straight away, without the need to leave the computer downloading for several hours. This was great for me, as in my first year of university at the time, and without any internet in my halls of residence, I could pop down to the university library and enjoy the story in the evenings. On the other hand, it means that the movement and facial expressions are somewhat lacking, and the disconnect between the performances and the visuals is quite markedly apparent at times.
It must be able to record, playback, relay, and boost the screams.
One thing the restrictions of the flash animation unintentionally results in is quite a moody and atmospheric tone, owing to the need for lots of darkness and shadows to reduce the requirement for background detail. This lends the story a slightly gothic and spooky feel, and this felt quite appropriate on the cold winter nights I headed down to the library to enjoy the story.
Everyone! Shout for help! 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 Help us!
In retrospect, the first Doctor Who cartoon has some good things going for it. It's clearly made by people who took the project seriously, and what they produced, considering the budget limitations, time and indifference from the BBC, is quite an achievement. The fact that the decision was taken not to cram in self-indulgent references to the past, or to crowbar in a cavalcade of classic monsters for easy brand recognition, but to attempt to launch a potential new series, with teasing threads like the Robot Master, and a new Doctor, however inconsistently realised by the lead actor, makes it worthy of respect. I certainly enjoyed those wintry evenings down in the university library with my earphones firmly embedded. I was, for short bursts, watching new Doctor Who for the first time since 1996, and I appreciated the efforts of the production team. Of course, by the time the colourful animation was dancing in front of my eyes, I knew it was likely only ever to be an intriguing sidestep into what might have been. By that point, Richard E. Grant's Ninth Doctor had already been overshadowed by an official BBC announcement regarding the programme. Yes, after most of us had given up hope of it ever returning in a live-action episodic form, Doctor Who was to return as exactly that. Why the sudden about-face after years of BBC neglect? To understand this, we must take a look at how the television landscape had changed since 1989. As already mentioned, a fundamental reason for Grade and Powell's animosity towards the programme was their belief that fans of so-called cult television should not be pandered to, that the BBC should produce programming that appealed to the widest possible demographic to offer value for money to licence payers. Even putting aside their personal prejudices against so-called anoraks, they saw viewers of science fiction as a niche audience the indulgence of commissioning programme for would be a waste of public money. Having come from the heyday of light entertainment programming, they and other executives had a very singular, some might say closed-minded idea of what the public wanted. The 90s saw this philosophy challenged and then proved resoundingly wrong. First came Star Trek: The Next Generation, for which the BBC acquired first-run rights for the initial 2 seasons thanks to the insight of then-current controller Alan Yentob. The show was very popular, its first season gaining between 4 to 5 million viewers. Considering that more and more British homes were installing satellite dishes, affording them the choice of literally hundreds of channels, these viewing figures were impressive. The enthusiasm for science fiction television continued to grow, with further Star Trek spin-off series being embraced by fans and casual viewers alike, alongside further American imports like Stargate SG-1 and The X-Files. Spurred by the success of these shows, British television tried to launch similar ones of their own, such as Crime Traveller and Bugs, but none of these efforts captured the zeitgeist in the same way that their superior American counterparts had. Many executives seemed to come to the conclusion that such programming was beyond British television, and despite its growing popularity, was still something that appealed to socially awkward virgins, and therefore not a proper audience. The real game changer came in early 1999 with the British transmission of a show that straddled genres, and therefore demographics, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Joss Whedon's supernatural fantasy series combined physical action, romance, teen angst, and tongue-in-cheek comedy to result in a fresh and most importantly cool take on the gothic vampire genre, which was becoming eminently fashionable around the turn of the millennium. It enjoyed broad audience appeal, uniting the stereotypical anorak-wearing men with that of young women and girls who were hungry for the kind of kick-ass female hero that Sarah Michelle Gellar's Buffy represented. The show was in fact proportionally more popular in the UK than its home country, with regular audiences of around 4 million, which on BBC Two, usually considered a minority channel compared to its big brother, was a phenomenal success. Buffy's popularity coincided with the fact that many of the crusty old men who had littered BBC Television Centre for so many years, the ones who were too old to have grown up with the magic of quality sci-fi like Doctor Who, had moved on and been replaced by younger, more innovative creatives, those who had watched Jon Pertwee and Tom Baker take on the evils of the universe from behind their parents' sofas. By 2003, it was obvious that the production of a homegrown sci-fi series targeted at that very audience who had so eagerly lapped up Buffy was a no-brainer.
Giles, don't mention it. It was my pleasure to make the world safe for humanity again.
I'm not saying that your methods are without merit. You're expending too much time and energy. It should simply be plunge and move on. Plunge and... Hello?
After a possible co-production of a Buffy spin-off to centre around the Doctor-like character of Giles came to a complicated nothing, the BBC finally began to take a reboot of Doctor Who seriously. Head of drama Jane Tranter keenly gave the green light. The series' rights had finally reverted back to the corporation after years of trying to farm it out to numerous studios and production companies, and there now seemed no obstacle to beginning production. Well, almost no obstacle. As covered in previous episodes of this series, classic Doctor Who was shot in and around London and BBC Television Centre, making use of multi-camera setups and galleries, facilities now somewhat outdated for the kind of production values a new drama would demand. A lot of dramas since the early 90s had been filmed at studios owned by other production companies dotted around the country. Having had their fingers burned by expensive co-productions in the past, and keen to enjoy the exclusive rights to a flagship programme once more, the BBC needed a base of operations for Doctor Who, with a dedicated crew who would work solely on the new programme. This is where BBC Wales steps into the frame. The capital of Wales, Cardiff, had enjoyed redevelopment over the previous years, moving, like many former industrial centres, from an industrialised port city to a commercial and cultural centre. The BBC already had a presence in the capital, producing local soap opera Pobly Cwm since 1974, meaning that there were both facilities and experienced production crew easily on hand, as well as an established drama department, something that many of the other prospective studios around Great Britain did not offer. The head of drama at BBC Wales, Julie Gardner, was the one to receive the go-ahead from Jane Tranter. Having recently acquired the role, Gardner had ambitious plans to put BBC Wales on the map. Having started her career with the corporation back in the mid-90s, she had gone on to work on projects for rival channel ITV, where she encountered a fellow Welshman, writer Russell T Davies, collaborating with him on his latest drama, Casanova. Davies's star was very much in the ascendant. Having written for the BBC Children's Department back in the late 80s, penning successful sci-fi thriller Dark Season, he had moved into more adult drama during the last decade of the century. His name became particularly prominent after the airing in early 1999 of Queer as Folk on Channel 4, an 8-episode series based on Davies's own experiences of Manchester's gay scene. The show, predictably, courted controversy and complaints from some sectors of society, notably a now 88-year-old Mary Whitehouse still proudly wielding her sceptre of righteousness. Despite these grumblings, the show was very successful and led to a broader discussion of gay rights and those of the LGBT community. Davies was also an enormous fan of Doctor Who, having contributed to the Virgin New Adventures book range and including many fan-pleasing Easter eggs in Queer as Folk, with one of the lead characters, Vince Tyler, being an enthusiast of the series.
Poor sod. Give him 6 months, you'll be able to name all the Doctor Who's in order. William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton, Jon Pertwee, Tom Baker, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy.
What about Paul McGann?
Paul McGann doesn't count.
With Davies's credentials firmly established, he approached the BBC about the possibility of reviving his favourite show, and a low-budget version was briefly considered by the higher-ups, only to founder before a single page was written due to the rights complications. With the success of Queer as Folk, Davies went on to script further critically acclaimed dramas such as Bob and Rose and The Second Coming, the latter starring Christopher Eccleston in the role of Stephen Baxter, a working-class northerner who discovers that he is the second coming of Jesus Christ.
I don't have to. I could stay. I can do what I want. Because you need me. You lot need me. I could bring Pete back. I could raise him from the dead just like that.
The two-part drama was again controversial, this time for its atheistic themes, but it was yet another notch in Davies's belt and helped to ensure his was a name in great demand from various production companies. With Julie Gardner moving to BBC Wales, Davies was convinced by her and Jane Tranter to bring his nascent period drama Casanova to the corporation with the offer of a further pet project to sweeten the deal. This is where the fates finally aligned, with the combination of the BBC's desire for a homegrown sci-fi show to appeal to the now recognised young audience, the facilities of BBC Wales, and Russell T Davies's enthusiasm to return the show to its former glory and prove all those who had mocked and derided it over the previous 15 years definitively wrong. Doctor Who was finally coming back.
Right, well, we're going to the Cardiff Royal Infirmary for day 1 of shooting. Call time is 12 o'clock, and we're starting with a hospital sequence from episode 4.
Fundamental to the revived series was the wholly different attitude from BBC heads than the one it had endured for so many of its latter years. From the off, Davies had their full support. Controller of BBC One, Lorraine Heggessey, was determined to return Saturday night television to its former glory with a prestige drama screened in the early evening that would unite the family in living rooms across the country, a tradition that cultural experts claimed was long dead in an age of multiple screens and online competition. To her credit, Heggessey didn't want to just play it safe with yet more so-called talent shows and their phone-in votes. She wanted to take the risk of providing families once again with a scripted show with broad audience appeal and pre-existing brand recognition. Considering the relative failure of similar efforts over the previous decade, and Doctor Who's somewhat tarnished reputation as cheap and disposable, it was imperative that the revival enjoy generous financial support and big headline names to get bums on seats. The former came in the form of a reported budget of at least £10 million, some of it sourced from an acquisition deal with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation ahead of the show being developed. The latter came down to the new production team and to Russell T Davies himself. For 26 years, Doctor Who had only really had 2 long-term production staff, the producer and the script editor. For the series' 21st century return, changes to how television was made meant that the new show would have a dedicated team of creatives and administrators to oversee production and publicity. Joining Russell T Davies, who would also be head writer, were the aforementioned Julie Gardner and head of continuing drama Mal Young to make up the 3 executive producers. Add to this producer Phil Collinson and casting director Andy Pryor, and the new series had a core team of experienced and ambitious professionals to begin making the early decisions and lay the groundwork for what could have been the greatest success, or failure, of their careers. Davies had prepared a 10-page series pitch and overview of what would be a 13-episode series of 45-minute installments. From the start, his intentions for the revival were clear. Being a fan steeped in the history of the show, Davies was not about to throw the baby out with the bathwater and reboot the programme like that which was proposed by John Leakley's infamous Bible produced as part of the torturous development of the 1996 TV movie. But unlike the makers of the Solo McGann outing, Davies also knew that it would be folly to hurl 26 years and more of continuity and backstory at the viewers. The new show had to hit the ground running with a broad audience appeal. Throwing in Seals of Rassilon or other references to past mythology would alienate viewers. One unintentional benefit of the long hiatus and the arguable missteps of the 1996 TV movie is that it afforded the opportunity to professional fans like Davies to really reduce and distill the core and key ingredients that made Doctor Who so good and so unique. Since Michael Grade's time, the show had always been unfavourably compared to other shows like Star Trek, and the 1996 TV movie was inevitably influenced by contemporary successors like The X-Files. Davies, as a long-term fan, knew that Doctor Who was great in its own right, and, as an award-winning writer, knew that its return needed to be just that, a return to its fundamental and unique selling points, not a Frankenstein's monster of past glories stitched together with stuff borrowed from other contemporary hits.
Well, I was going to say, but it's important to remind people now with this whole enterprise around us that it was a bad joke at that time, Doctor Who, wasn't it? I mean, people thought it was rubbish. Yeah.
Yes, its memory had just degraded over the years, and you forget that in the 60s of Dalek Mania, it was a massive programme, it was a huge, and then during Tom Baker's reign, and I think I honestly watched every single episode and always liked it in every form of Doctor. But it's hard, isn't it? Because it just television tradition left it behind, those 3-walled proscenium arch sets with the lighting and the budget that they had. And plus people make a joke of science fiction anyway. Even they do it with this nice expensive version, so it was ripe to be mocked, I'm afraid.
Davies recognised what many fans and even producers before him had overlooked as they strove to capture this fundamental spirit with superficial gimmicks. The fact that the show was always at its best when it moved with the times, reflected contemporary concerns, and offered relatable characters. Consider other key periods in the show's history, the turning points where gambles were made to regenerate not just the lead character, but the wider format of the programme itself. The Jon Pertwee era, exiling the Doctor to Earth to serve as a Quatermass-like advisor to a military outfit, facing up to not just alien invaders, but an officious bureaucracy in bed with unethical corporate interests.
Just testing.
The Hinchcliffe era, which saw the Doctor fight against gothic monstrosities and shadowy villains that pushed at the boundaries of appropriate tea-time content. The neon-lit synthesized sound of the early 80s reinvention. Or the evolution of the central hero into the manipulative cosmic chess player, luring evil gods into unforgiving traps, a streetwise teen with a passion for explosives by his side.
Any regrets?
Yes.
Yes.
I wish I'd blown it up instead.
Wicked.
Each time, the show had reinvented itself with some major changes to its format, execution and thematic devices, while still maintaining the core idea of
a thing that looks like a police box standing in a junkyard. It can move anywhere in time and space.
Yes.
Quite so.
Russell T Davies knew that he needed to strip back to that core, whilst at the same time putting his own unique stamp on the packaging, a true regeneration rather than reanimation. Central to this intention would be the casting of the Ninth Doctor. From the very beginning, Davies knew that he wanted the new Doctor to be a departure from his predecessors, remembering head of programming at Granada TV David Liddeman's reaction to McGann's Doctor as positive, except for his costume. His grim muttering of fancy dress to describe the look of the Eighth Doctor had stayed with the new showrunner for the last decade, and he was determined to ensure that new viewers would not be similarly alienated by the new Doctor's appearance. He envisioned him as a solid powerhouse of energy, still with fierce intellect, but not a fey, timid creature, garbed in an outfit reminiscent of public school semesters. It was Mal Young who first suggested Christopher Eccleston. The Northerner was known as a somewhat intense character actor, famous for playing tortured souls in weighty dramas about social issues. Having worked with him on Davies's own The Second Coming, there was a pre-existing relationship between the star and writer, but Davies initially shook his head, not thinking that Eccleston would be interested. Christopher Eccleston was born the day after the last episode of Hartnell two-parter The Edge of Destruction was aired in 1964, not that he'd have noticed. Growing up in a working-class family in Salford, Greater Manchester, Doctor Who was not something that grabbed the young man's attention. He felt unable to identify with a character who seemed to represent a typical middle-class authority figure, the kind of posh and patronising prig who had discriminated against his parents, grandparents and their antecedents for hundreds of years. He was born 8 years after his twin brothers, and the age gap and their twinish synchronicity left the young boy feeling somewhat other and solitary. He found school similarly uninspiring, inculcated with a sense of the futility of aspiration that had for so long prepared working-class northerners for the resignation of a life in the factories. This attitude, ground into people like the Ecclestons for generations, could only have had negative effects on their mental health. His father's inner turmoil regularly impacted on the family, with the sensitive Christopher feeling in particular the sense of frustration and resentment his father's mood swings and psychological projection engendered. Without truly understanding it, the young man began to develop issues of his own, including body dysmorphia, which would blight his later life with recurring bouts of anorexia. The actor recounts this experience and his relationship with his late father, who later developed dementia, with searing and courageous honesty in his book, I Love the Bones of You, which I can't recommend highly enough. He also goes on to explain that it was during his attendance at Eccles Sixth Form College that his liberation began, when, after being caught mucking about outside the drama department, a teacher encouraged him to do his mucking about inside rather than out. The event set him on a path to professional performances, seeing him study drama at Salford Tech before winning a place at the Central School of Speech and Drama. Eccleston struggled to find acting work in the 4 years after leaving drama school, having to resort to odd jobs as theatre ushers and life modelling, before finally landing a breakthrough role as Derek Bentley in 1991's Let Him Have It, the real-life story of a mentally disabled teenager controversially hanged for his role in the fatal shooting of a police officer in 1953. The film was well received, and Eccleston in particular was praised for his performance, leading to further success in popular television drama Cracker, before starring in director Danny Boyle's debut feature Shallow Grave. A starring role in 1996's seminal Our Friends in the North made Eccleston a household name, alongside co-stars Mark Strong and Daniel Craig, and established him as an actor at home with drama of import, handling real-world issues. This was further strengthened by his role that same year in Hillsborough, another real-life drama, this time revolving around the tragic disaster at Hillsborough Stadium in 1989. By the turn of the century, Eccleston's appearance in both film and television on both sides of the Atlantic had seen him become one of Britain's most respected actors, a performer whose name led any production considerable weight. His performance as Stephen Baxter in Russell T Davies's The Second Coming is of particular note for showing how he could portray a seemingly ordinary man wielding words of power and changing the world.
You are becoming gods. There's a new master of creation, and it's you. You've unraveled DNA. You're 5 years away from building your own people, and at the same time you're cultivating bacteria strong enough to kill every living thing. Do you think you're ready for that much power? You lot? You lot?
He was a so-called serious actor, known for his intensity and passion for the subtext of his work, not someone, surely, who'd be interested in taking on the frivolous role of an eccentric time-travelling alien with a penchant for silliness. Eccleston went for a run one evening in 2003, having read about Davies's helming of Doctor Who's return earlier that day. He'd been impressed by the Welshman's writing for The Second Coming, and his presence on the set had emphasised that this was a writer who cared greatly about his projects. After so many adult, heavy dramas, Eccleston was interested in taking on a role aimed at a family audience, and the left-field notion of playing a character seemingly so established as an upper-middle-class eccentric tickled the actor's rebellious fancy.
And why did you want to be the Doctor? Because Russell T Davies wrote it, and because it was an audience and an area television that I hadn't worked in. I've not had the privilege to act for children, really. And because I'm constantly told that I'm not funny and I'm not charming, and they were some of the demands in the role, so I felt it was a big gamble. There's two reasons to do it, Russell T Davies and the gamble, and I like a gamble. I think it's important as an actor or in any sphere of life to do the things that frighten you most.
One of my favourite quotes of Eccleston from the time, and one which shows how this thoughtful actor could bring new perspective to the role is, he's got two hearts, so does that mean he cares twice as much? After watching Blade Runner later that night, and being struck by the subtext and power to explore very relatable real-world issues through the heightened drama of sci-fi, he fired off an email to Doctor Who's new showrunner asking to be considered for the role of the new Doctor. Following the meeting where Mal Young had suggested Eccleston for the role, Davies found in his inbox that very email, and it was immediately clear to the producer exactly who'd be filling the Ninth Doctor's boots. It seems clear that the showrunner's intentions for the new Doctor neatly synergised with those of the leading man. The Ninth Doctor is a marked departure from his prior incarnations, so much so that the first images of filming snapped by tabloid paparazzi took many of us long-term fans by somewhat concerned surprise. In retrospect, the decision to dress the Doctor in the informality of leather jacket, V-neck sweater, black trousers and chunky boots fits perfectly with the need to strip the show back down to its core elements. Sporting the kind of hairdo that McGann so narrowly missed out on having before him, Eccleston's Doctor is a back-to-basics Doctor, the superficial gimmicks of 80s Who, all those question marks, firmly relegated to the dustbin of history, at least for now. I admit, when I first saw the images without any further context, I was worried that the show would be unrecognisable as the one I had loved for so long, but I needn't have worried. I see now that it was important that the first impression the revived programme made on the general audience be a positive one, divorced from any of the kitsch camp that had come to define the classic era in the minds of those with the power to switch the channel. First impressions count, and the perspective through which these impressions are made is vitally important. That's why Davies also knew that of equal importance as the characterisation of the Doctor to a successful relaunch would be the companion. The production team weren't necessarily seeking a big name in the same way that they had with the Doctor, but former pop star turned professional actress Billie Piper brought that status nevertheless.
I've got a choice. Stay at home with my mum, my boyfriend, my job, or chuck it all in for danger. Again,
many of us pompous aficionados reacted with abject horror to the news of her casting, not realising how good an actor she truly is, nor how Russell T Davies's writing would charm us so entirely. Ironically, it was the superficial aspects of the costume and casting that we were focusing on, instead of seeing how, in fact, these very aspects would contribute to making a show that had been mocked so mercilessly that we almost treated our fandom as a guilty secret, go on to be one of the most successful British television series of modern times. taking inspiration from earlier eras of Doctor Who, such as the very first episode, but also fitting nicely with how Davies wanted to bring the show back down to Earth and human nature, we begin with Rose Tyler, not the Doctor. We see our tiny world and our tiny country before entering Rose's tiny flat and tiny bedroom. We are treated to a montage of Rose's life in the capital, a normal life. She's not a particle physicist, nuclear scientist or astronaut, she's an ordinary young woman leading a distinctly ordinary life. Those other hypothetical characters would have been interesting, but this new series needed to ground itself in our reality first, to bring the adventure to our doorsteps just like it had back in 1963 with a junkyard and a classroom. The companion has always served the function of the audience identification figure, and Rose is the very personification of the audience the new show wanted to appeal to, just like Buffy, so we spend time with her and use her life as a touchstone before all the wonder and excitement come crashing in. Davies deftly juggles his loyal desire to faithfully continue the show and to resurrect it for a modern audience, and for this arguably took cues from the classic era itself. 1989's Survival, the last Doctor Who story to be screened before its cancellation, took place in the seemingly quiet and peaceful, but very ordinary environs of Ace's hometown, Perivale. The leafy suburbs and high-rise council flats into which the demonic machinations of the Master intrude are barely distinguishable from that of the Revival series' debut Rose.
He's safe! What's he still doing it for?
Malice.
And Ace herself, such an evolution from the past few underdeveloped Screamers, serves as a template on which Rose Tyler was fashioned.
Wilson?
As soon as our new, very 21st century companion descends to the basement of the shop in which she works, and the zippy pace and brightness of the opening fades, I knew Davies had managed to pull it off. It was Pertwee's Yeti on the Loo in Tooting Bec for the modern age. Being such a fan of the classic series, Davies was keenly aware of how the decisions he made and the words he wrote would go down in history, even if he wasn't entirely sure the series would work. This wasn't a phone-it-in last-minute kind of project. Here was an opportunity to finally realise all those fantasies of writing real, proper Doctor Who that he had harboured for so many years, to make everyone else, the not-we's, realise exactly why we love this show so much. Menaced by monsters twisted from everyday objects, with no obvious escape, our hero of time and space takes our hands and tells us to run. Who could have asked for a better entrance for our titular hero? How better to sum up the quintessence of Doctor Who? Later, with the Doctor following up on an Auton signal, Rose and the audience get a fuller introduction to this new incarnation.
What are you doing here?
I live here.
Well, what'd you do that for?
Because I do. I'm only home because someone blew up my job.
That's got the wrong signal. You're not plastic, mate. No. Bonehead. Bye then.
It's suggested straight away that his regeneration was recent, but without any details as to how this came about. Unlike previous incarnations, the Ninth doesn't seem to be suffering any post-regenerative amnesia or trauma. Rather here, he comes across as supremely confident, almost arrogant in his dismissal of Rose's concerns.
Rose Tyler. Ah, could have been worse. Look at the ears.
He swaggers about the Tylers' flat with a flippant disregard for what he sees as their petty lives, suggesting that he's been without the company of a companion for some time, forgetting the needs of the few, whilst concerned with the grander scheme of protecting the many. When pressed by a determined Rose about who he really is, we get a glimpse into his deeper nature, the powerful yet lonely soul still fighting the good fight, despite the monumental loss suggested by his evasiveness.
Really though, Doctor, tell me, who are you?
Do you know, like we were saying, about the Earth revolving? It's like when you're a kid. The first time they tell you that the world's turning and you just can't quite believe it because everything looks like it's standing still. I can feel it. The turn of the Earth. The ground beneath our feet is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, and the entire planet is hurtling around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour, and I can feel it. We're falling through space, you and me. Clinging to the skin of this tiny little world, and if we let go, that's who I am. Now forget me, Rose Tyler. Go home.
Jackie gave her to me to look after. How times change.
One benefit of Davis's approach to the series means that the characters can be developed across the series in a way that arguably had not happened much in the classic era. The only comparable example would be that of the Seventh Doctor in Ace, and that never really came to full fruition. With Series 1, Davis takes advantage of his position as head writer to develop themes and characters across otherwise separate stories, resulting in arguably one of the more successfully established Doctors.
Can't do anything right, can I?
Since you ask, no. So, don't touch the baby.
I'm not stupid.
You could have fooled me. All right. I'm sorry. I wasn't really going to leave you on your own.
I know.
Between you and me, I haven't got a plan. No idea. No way out.
You'll think of something.
When one considers that the 6th, 7th and even 5th Doctors each ended their tenures with a sense that there was more that could have been done, more for us to explore of their characters, the 9th Doctor, with fewer stories than even the 6th, has a much more rounded and complete life on screen owing to Davis's focus on character.
You think it'll last forever? People and cars and concrete. But it won't. One day it's all gone.
We learn later how the seemingly blithe Doctor is in fact hiding traumas of a war that ended in tragedy, leaving our hero the sole survivor of his race.
My planet's gone. It's dead. It burned like the Earth. It's just rocks and dust. Before its time.
What happened?
There was a war and we lost.
A war with who?
A psychological scar, the facing of which he seems to be desperately running away from. Indeed, unlike some of his previous incarnations, there's a sense that he is running towards danger, not just out of a sense of moral responsibility, but out of a despairing need to finally go out in a blaze of glory. With the 9th Doctor, we have an incarnation with emotions roiling beneath a thin surface, a sense that at any minute he could explode with manic laughter or righteous anger. As Davis described in his original pitch, stand too close to him, you could get burnt.
Look, if I did forget some kid called Mickey...
Yeah, it's not a kid.
because I'm busy trying to save the life of every stupid ape blundering about on top of this planet, all right?
All right?
Yes, it is.
If you are an alien, how come you sound like you're from the north?
Lots of planets have a north.
This damage, this instability, gives Rose much more to do than merely be the damsel in distress. He offers her adventure and excitement, but through their adventures she gives him a reason to live, and an appreciation once again for the simple pleasures of the common man.
Oh, can you smell chips?
Yeah. Yeah.
I want chips.
Me too.
She becomes his rock, the epitome of all his past companions, in the sense that she reminds him of the importance of survival.
Come on then, tightwad, chips are on me. We've only got 5 billion years till the shops close.
Is it any wonder that he falls in love with her?
Right then, I'll be off. Unless, I don't know, you could come with me. This box isn't just a London Opera, you know, it goes anywhere in the universe, free of charge.
Don't. He's an alien, he's a thing.
He's not invited. What do you think?
It's an arc expertly established and developed across the 13 episodes of Series 1, with Davis skillfully building on the foundations across each episode, and it's what grabbed the attention of that wide audience the BBC were aiming for.
Yeah, I can't. I've got to go and find my mum, and someone's got to look after this stupid lamp. So.
Okay. See you around.
Beyond the superficial silliness of shop window mannequins shooting up the local mall, there was a compelling relationship being established between two intriguing and likeable characters, the basis of all good drama, no matter the genre. It was a strategy that proved the naysayers wrong. The humour, excitement, pace, and most importantly, depth of character that Davis ensured was established in the debut firmly grabbed the audience's attention and anticipation for the rest of the series, as over 10 million people tuned in.
Did I mention it also travels in time?
Thanks.
Thanks for what?
Exactly.
Is Rose a perfect episode? No, not at all. Even at the time, I found it rather childish in places, with some of the humour overdone. It also suffers, in my opinion, with an issue that would return to affect the show several times over the next few series, being overly lit, which reduced the atmosphere and defanged much of the scare factor.
What was he doing there?
I'm not going on about it, Mickey. Really, I'm not, because I know it sounds daft, but I don't think he's safe. He's dangerous.
But you can trust me, sweetheart. Babe.
Darling.
Sugar. Babe. Sugar.
But as a first episode of the revived show, it expertly does exactly what it needs to, seemingly effortlessly introducing a relatable yet aspirational companion, a modernised Doctor, but one who still embodies the essence of his predecessors, a striking alien threat, and an effective contrapuntal sense of the unfamiliar being disguised as the everyday, the fundamental ingredient to the uniqueness of Doctor Who. Behind the scenes, the reality of making the show was far removed from the confidence with which it beamed into our living rooms. The first production block, comprising the series opener alongside episodes 4 and 5, which would comprise the first two-parter, were fraught with difficulties as a production team unfamiliar with the unforeseen technical difficulties and demands of making an effects-heavy modern science fiction show knocked everyone involved for six. Much of the blame for this has since been levelled at director Keith Boak, and whilst it's true that he has not returned to helm any subsequent episodes since, Russell T Davies was adamant that the responsibility for the production difficulties is shared between the lead production staff. Speaking to Doctor Who magazine in 2005, the executive said, "It was a very, very hard block for everyone. It was very, very hard for Keith, who actually, yes, could have planned things differently, but none of us told him to, because we were as in the dark as he was." The recording block overran significantly, producer Phil Collinson saying that, after filming for 2 weeks, we were 3 weeks behind. On top of logistical problems of shooting in landmark London locations, the real issues came when trying to film the complicated Slitheen costumes, where a combination of the bulky and awkward prosthetics and the under-rehearsed performers struggling inside of them significantly impacted on the schedule. Several scenes had to be dropped, only to be picked up in between scenes filmed for later episodes. To compound the problems on set was the lack of planning of precisely where and when the computer-generated versions of the Slitheen would be composited into the final edit, meaning that the ambitious project began to seem a little cobbled together on the spot. It's probable that the chaos and stress of production this early into principal photography led to a lot of frayed tempers and arguments, not least from a lead actor known for heavily investing in the projects in which he is cast, but more on this later.
I just don't believe you. Why won't you tell me where you've been?
Considering these difficulties, it's a wonder that the three stories work as well as they do, primarily as a result of Davis's writing and the commitment of the lead actors.
No.
Then what is it? Because you waltz in here all charm and smiles.
There are some cracking scenes which help to develop the character and relationship of the Doctor and his new companion, with some interesting domestic dynamics introduced, which still feel quite fresh and unusual.
I am a doctor.
Prove it. Stitch this, mate.
After 40 years of companions leaving home, usually never to return, bringing the Doctor back to the ordinary London flat of Rose and her mum Jackie makes him begin to face up to the sometimes negative impact his interference can have on the lives of those who accompany him on his adventures, as well as those left behind who love them.
Do you know what terrifies me is that you still can't say? What happened to you, Rose? What can be so bad that you can't tell me, sweetheart? Where were you?
But I'd be lying if I didn't acknowledge that I was a little concerned by the series so far when it was transmitted, specifically the very uneven tone. After the frankly rather nonsensical climax of episode 2, The End of the World, with its video game logic Deus Ex Machina, why put the button on the other side of big fans that inexplicably cross a walkway?
Honestly, it's super.
Oh. Excuse me.
And the fart jokes with the Slitheen, repeated a few too often to convince me it was meant for the amusement of anyone other than little boys and girls.
I cancelled it. They don't get in the way. Oh, there I go. Oh!
And me! I'm shaking my booty.
This wasn't really the Doctor Who I personally loved. It was an obvious success, and I appreciated that a new generation were experiencing the Doctor's adventures, but I was unsure whether it was really for me.
The bridge is made.
Episode 3, The Unquiet Dead, was more promising, with the pseudo-historical shenanigans I so love of the classic series.
The bridge is open. We descend.
You said that you were few in number.
But I was still adjusting to the 45-minute runtime, something that seemed to be forcing the concepts and supporting characters to become more two-dimensional and superficial, with the need to squeeze a traditional 5-part narrative structure into half the time it used to have, even in the late 80s.
Mr. Sneakerback!
It was with the transmission of episode 6 that my fears were finally allayed, with a long-awaited return of the Doctor's most deadly enemies, well, one of them at least, in Dalek. On the trail of a mysterious signal, the TARDIS lands in Utah in the near future of 2012, and the Doctor and Rose find themselves trespassing in the underground museum of morally bankrupt billionaire Henry Van Statten, who has a passion for exploiting alien technology scavenged from crash sites around the Earth for his own greedy gain.
Someone's got a hobby.
Don't open that door until we get a result.
Recognising the Doctor's expertise in alien artefacts, Van Statten has him taken to see his one living specimen, which he has facetiously named a Metaltron, a creature that has always refused to speak despite years of torture. On entering its cell, the Doctor offers reassurance and support before the lights snap on, revealing the creature's true identity.
Impossible.
For a while, it looked like the Doctor's most famous adversaries would not be returning with the revival. As mentioned in previous episodes of this series, unlike many of the other monsters of the show's long history, the rights to the Daleks do not lie with the BBC. Rather, they are jealously guarded by the estate of their creator-writer Terry Nation. Many of the production staff on The New Who, unaware of this complication, made the assumption that of course the Daleks would be coming back, and said as much to the press, much to the chagrin of their rights holders. It seems ridiculous looking back now, but aside from this indignation, the Nation estate were concerned whether the image of the Daleks could be risked in a production that most people were not convinced would work. A stalemate arose between July and August of 2004, meaning that extensive fallback plans had to be developed in the event that the Daleks would not be available. Before this, however, Russell T Davies had taken as his inspiration for the return of the Doctor's implacable foes the 2003 Big Finish audio play Jubilee, a 6th Doctor story written by Robert Shearman, who had penned the excellent Chimes of Midnight referenced last episode.
Hello? Is there anybody in here? Who are you? I heard you cry out in pain. Can I help you? Speak to me! Oh no!
Doctor, you are an enemy of the Daleks. You are to be exterminated.
Shearman's intent with the story was to return to the original fascistic inspiration of the Daleks, to reinforce their hateful quintessence after so many years of relegation to the robotic henchmen of their creator. Davies thought this was just what was needed for their reintroduction on television too, and promptly commissioned Shearman to write it after first conceiving of the 2012 setting and the character of the ET-obsessed tech billionaire. With the rights issues, Shearman and Davies had to go back to the drawing board and replace the antagonist with a new enemy, a robotically enhanced life form with the sadistic motivations of a deranged child who killed for fun. Fortunately, the stalemate over rights was finally resolved, allowing the Dalek to return to its rightful place. The alternative enemy was finally recycled later as the Toclafane in 2007.
What about us?
We're the same species. Why do you kill so many of us?
Because it's fun.
Human race. Greatest monsters of them all.
After discussing the Daleks with his wife, who was a great reference for the average viewer's perception of the fascistic pepperpots, Sherman made sure to address each one of their aspects frequently mocked, efficiently and effectively rebutting the lazy back catalogue of hack comedians in a way that made fans punch the air with a sense of vindication. A sink plunger, you say? Well, that rubber sucker will crush your skull.
What you gonna do? Sucker me to death?
Thinking of creeping up behind the Dalek to tackle it, safe from the aim of its death ray? Think again. Oh, and in case you missed Remembrance of the Daleks as elevating antics, and feel confident to taunt the Dalek in a stairwell, this story finally leaves no doubt as to their ability to pursue their quarry across any terrain.
Great big alien death machine, defeated by a flight of stairs.
Elevate!
The new design was also a success, the brassy steampunk aesthetic introduced at the behest of Russell T Davies, but with the careful design and construction undertaken by production designer Edward Thomas, with Mike Tucker and his team at the BBC Visual Effects Department. Tucker had been involved with Doctor Who in the McCoy era, having worked on the aforementioned Remembrance of the Daleks, and had written several of the BBC Doctor Who novels during the Wilderness years, so he was no stranger to the programme and its lore, nor unaware of the importance of the project to bring the show's most iconic enemies into the 21st century. The input of such knowledgeable professional fans ensured that the Daleks would not be embellished beyond recognition. The fundamental silhouette was most assuredly to be maintained, with no arachnoid accessories like those proposed in the early drafts of the McGann TV movie. The end result is a chunkier, solidly metallic shell, which combines some of the best features of previous iterations, even those of the non-canon Peter Cushing movies. When original designer Ray Cusick was given a tour of the workshop, he commented on how the brass design gave them a more terrestrial appearance, at odds with the futuristic metal originally intended.
These things are unearthly.
Yeah.
They have powers of intelligence and construction and manufacture beyond human beings' understanding, you know. So if they wanted strength, they wouldn't have to make it look as though it's all riveted and bolted together. This is an earthly concept.
Yeah.
I mean, to them, rivets and bolts are old-fashioned, they're archaic.
I agree with him in this regard. Whilst the brass and rivets do make for a visually arresting aesthetic, and one somewhat unique for an alien race in television science fiction, I personally prefer them as some people have since visualised them in fan art and the like. This preference for the silver look may just be nostalgia, however. What's certain is that the new Dalek works magnificently in the story. The choice to make their reintroduction with a sole survivor affords the opportunity to truly delve into their motivations and character. The Silence of the Lambs inspired two-hander scenes between the Doctor and his greatest enemy, a truly masterful stroke, helped no end by the superb writing by Sherman.
What does that mean? I am a soldier. I was bred to receive orders.
Well, you're never going to get any. Not ever.
I demand orders.
They're never gonna come. Your race is dead. You all burn, all of you. 10 million ships on fire. The entire Dalek race wiped out in 1 second.
You lie!
I watched it happen.
I made it happen.
You destroyed us!
This is where Christopher Eccleston really shines, dispensing with the gentlemanly banter of previous incarnations to show how damaged and hurt our hero has truly become by his experiences off-screen in a war, we now learn, against this very foe. His righteous anger and unbridled hate reduce him to screaming, froth-mouthed at the personification of his loathing, transforming him, ironically, into the very thing he despises.
If you want orders, follow this one. Kill yourself.
The Daleks must survive!
The Daleks have failed.
Why don't you finish the job and make the Daleks extinct?
Rid the universe of your filth. Why don't you just die?
You would make a good Dalek.
Rose, again, is thrust to the very forefront of the plot, her key role as the conscience of the Doctor clearly delineated, defining the vital importance of the companion in a way arguably not as well illustrated since Ian and Barbara. Shearman's choice to make her the seeming damsel in distress to serve the traditional function of driving the Doctor to action in an attempt to save her, before cleverly subverting this role as she learns to empathise with her captor in a way only someone completely unfamiliar with the dreaded Daleks could do, means that the story gets to truly have its cake and eat it.
You're out. You made it. Never thought I'd feel the sunlight again.
To simultaneously reinforce the chilling character of the classic monsters whilst also evolving them, presenting the Dalek as a living being, just as we, following the traumatised words and actions of our central hero, start to reduce it to a black and white enemy in much the same way the Daleks themselves view the rest of the universe. It helps that special makeup effects and prosthetics designer Neil Gorton's visualisation of the Khaled mutant inside the shell is realised so well at long last. This twisted lump of hate with its vestigial eye watery with pain allows the audience to actually pity, if not sympathise with the monster, to drive home the point that this abomination is nevertheless the remnants of a thinking, feeling being.
Rose, get out of the way now!
When the Doctor attempts to save Rose through violent extermination of his enemy, a solution so many other films and television programmes would not have hesitated to play out without much reflection, Doctor Who's raison d'etre was once more clearly demarcated, as Rose's criticism makes him ashamed and self-aware, reminding him exactly who he is and which lines he should not cross.
It's the sunlight, that's all it wants.
But it can't.
It couldn't kill Van Statten, it couldn't kill me, it's changing. What about you, Doctor? What the hell are you changing into?
I couldn't. I wasn't. Oh, Rose. They're all dead.
I sat back in my sofa, content that Doctor Who had truly returned. This contentment was furthered by the transmission of episodes 9 and 10, The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances. After Stephen Moffat's penning of a charity special actually respectful of the show's legacy, and his contributions to Who literature during the Wilderness years, Russell T Davies was committed to commissioning the award-winning comedy writer for the new series from the start. Alongside Shearman, Moffat took his place amongst the fans-turned-professionals appointed to write for the revival, including Paul Cornell and Mark Gatiss. To celebrate their dreams coming true, the four writers celebrated at the Indian restaurant Chula in London, before hunkering down to shape the Doctor's 21st century adventures. With Moffat's pedigree, Davies offered a lot of free rein, establishing only the time period, main antagonist, and the stipulation of a new companion. Opening with the Doctor and Rose pursuing a Chula warship through the time vortex, the name of the alien race an in-joke reference to that celebratory dinner, the TARDIS materialises in London during the Blitz of the Second World War. Before long, the two travellers are separated as the bombs fall, with Rose being saved by an enigmatic yet suave time agent, whilst the Doctor puzzles over the motivations of the titular empty child, a solitary boy masked in a creepy respirator, forever asking,
"Are you my mummy?"
It was a world and time so familiar to school kids, the home front of World War II being ever present in primary school curricula, that the story found an easy foundation in the minds of its target audience on which to build its creepy atmosphere.
Excuse me. Could I have everybody's attention just for a mo?
Okay, it's a somewhat sanitised and stereotypical rendition of a very real historical horror, but the realisation of war-torn London afforded the show the opportunity to lay out its stall to full effect with a story so definitively reminiscent of the classic era at its best, but inclusive of its new 21st century humour, depth of character, and progressive representation.
First rule of active camouflage. Park somewhere you remember.
Captain Jack Harkness, the pansexual time agent from the 51st century, makes an immediate impact, serving to develop the Doctor by contrast and in competition as an awkward love triangle between the three lead characters as established.
I trust him because he's like you, except with dating and dancing.
Rather than having the Doctor kiss his companion all of a sudden, a la the TV movie, he has to prove to her that he is in fact a creature capable of physical intimacy via the metaphor of dancing, a more subtle and pre-Watershed appropriate metaphor.
900 years old, me. I've been around a bit. I think you can assume at some point I've danced.
You?
Problem?
Doesn't the universe implode or something if you dance?
Well, I've got the moves, but I wouldn't want to boast.
All right. What was the cause of death?
There wasn't one. They're not dead.
The real triumph of the story, however, is of course the gas mask zombies, physically re-engineered humans devoid of conscious thought, forever seeking their mummies, but never finding them.
They just don't die.
The creation of such easily imitated monsters was quite a seemingly effortless feat, and the shuffling, brainless creatures quickly took their place amongst the all-time great classic villain roster of Who baddies. They would be the first of many to flow from the pen of Stephen Moffat.
You, my mummy.
During production, there was some concern about whether cuts would need to be made to make the episode suitable for the time slot. It was to some relief and vindication for director James Hawes that the BBC acknowledged the quality of the horror being served up, recognising the skillful handling of the threat within the heightened reality of the film noir aesthetic. Indeed, the climax of the story is one of the most hopeful and life-affirming in the programme's history. The clever revelation of the source of the problem being microscopic medical drones mistaking human biology, who resolve the problem once a recognisable template is offered, leads to a conclusion where
everybody lives, Rose. Just this once! Everybody lives!
Not something that can be said for the majority of Doctor Who. The Doctor finally gets to save everyone, and Eccleston's realisation of his joy at this outcome is infectiously triumphant.
The world doesn't want to get by without you just yet, and I don't blame it one bit.
These are your patients. All better now?
Yes.
By this stage, however, it had been impossible to miss the news that our new Doctor was to be leaving in a matter of weeks. The full truth behind Eccleston's decision to depart may never be known. As with Colin Baker's unceremonious exit, there has been endless speculation and rumour to stoke the fires of online debate. But from interviews with the key players since, and Eccleston's own sparse commentary on the events given in his autobiography, it seems that the principal actor ran into conflict with certain production staff at a senior level. It is unclear whether this included Davis or not, but reading between the lines, it seems more likely to be BBC higher-ups, who may have expressed concerns about his portrayal of the Doctor. To further muddy the waters, we can add to this the gruelling and initially chaotic schedule with an untested team, as mentioned prior, and rumours of some kind of mistreatment of lower production staff by their seniors.
It doesn't feel like a burden, no. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to play the part and to work with that crew, who are shooting as we speak. I've spent the last 8 months, 6 days a week, 14 hours a day, with a group of people. I'm not talking about all the show-offs you're going to see at this launch, or me. I'm just like the tip of an iceberg. I'm talking about the people, the cameramen, the prop men, who made this programme. And it's been a privilege. It's not a burden. It was a joy to play him, really.
It seems that Eccleston's integrity did not permit him to commit to a second series. The news of his departure was unfortunately announced soon after the transmission of his debut episode, further angering the lead, and this pall hung over what was otherwise a triumphant series. To have our hero finally back, and in such a successful fashion, a long-awaited vindication for all those years of devotion, but for it to be soured by uncertainty as the same old gutter press, who had sneered for so long at the object of our devotion, gossiped and traded barely credible facts about the tumultuous developments behind the scenes, was alarming and left a somewhat foul taste in the mouth. It was hastily and somewhat unceremoniously announced that star of Davis's previous drama, Casanova, David Tennant, would be taking over as the 10th Doctor, and what should have been a shock twist at the end of Series 1 almost became an inevitable unfolding of events. The fact that the parting of the ways still delivered surprise and satisfaction is a testament to Davis's writing and the two lead performances.
I will not die. I cannot die.
With the culmination of the season-long Bad Wolf story arc, and having annihilated the Daleks, seen finally in a fan-pleasing multitude, Rose is saved by her doctor in the worthiest sacrifice the character had made since the Caves of Androzani. Unlike the comatose Perry, however, Rose definitively signals her credentials as a proactive 21st century companion by being the saviour of the Doctor's moral soul, providing the only way out from a repeat of the genocide that allegedly ended the Time War, in a way that even the great Time Lord could not foresee.
The sun and the moon. The day and night. Why do they hurt?
The power's gonna kill you, and it's my fault.
I can see everything. All that is. All that was. All that ever could be.
That's what I see. All the time. And doesn't it drive you mad?
My head
Come here.
is killing me.
I think you need a doctor.
To take from her the death promised by such an action seems an honour and privilege he cannot shirk. And so, the light that burned twice as bright burned half as long, and the Ninth Doctor regenerated with a final, characteristically immodest pronouncement of,
Before I go, I just want to tell you, you were fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And you know what? So was I.
Hello. Okay.
The beaming cheekiness of a new Doctor beckoned further adventures in time and space. Would they build on the success of Series 1? Could lightning strike twice? Had Doctor Who really returned as a TV fixture? All that was certain was that the new series had at least one convert. Michael Grade.
I have to say, as soon as I arrived back at the BBC many years later as the chairman, the first thing that greets me is that they've revived Doctor Who, and thank goodness they have, because the production values, the storytelling, Russell T Davies' scripts, the whole thing is absolutely magical. And
to get, I think it's 8.6 million they got on Saturday night at the 6:40 slot.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's brilliant.